Let us go to understand something more about parasitology. In the first two sessions, we learned about the host and the parasite. Now, after understanding the different types of parasites, their mode of transmission and all, let us get to understand as to what all modifications, what all adaptations, what all morphological changes the parasite needs to have so that it can survive under this specific condition. Whether it's an ectoparasite or an endoparasite, it needs to have certain specific adaptations for leading that kind of life which it is meant for. To start with, let's understand the parasitic adaptations for an ectoparasite. It needs to be smaller than the host. Size wise, it has to be smaller than the host. Then it has to have particular types of mouth parts which help it in fixing itself to the host. That is, it will have teeth, it will have suckers, it will have some adhesive pads whereby it can hold to the host, body of the host. Then it needs to have adaptations for feeding, whether it is to suck the blood, whether it is to feed on the flesh, or whether it has to feed on whatever peripheral cells it is living on. It has to have a specific kind of mouth parts which enable it to lead the particular type of life. Then it has to survive under the exposed conditions. See, it is outside the body of host, so it is exposed to all environmental conditions, the sunlight, the water, whatever it is living in, it has to have adaptations for living under that condition, under that environmental state. And then for a while it may have to live even without the host, that is independent living. For a short while it has to be capable of, so that it can catch hold of, it can reach another host and start surviving on the host. Now that's about an ectoparasite. Endoparasitic adaptations, when we see, first thing that we must understand is it's a parasite living inside the body of host. So the first and foremost thing is it must be smaller in size. Smaller in the sense much smaller than the ectoparasite. Too small. Then it has to have a body structure which would help it in living inside the body of host. Maybe a slender body, maybe a flattened body, maybe a tubular body, or whatever, but which would help it in living inside the body of host. Then it has to have a protective covering. See, inside the body of host there will be various secretions, various enzymes, various lysozymes, various hormones, or various cellular secretions will be there which would try to destroy that parasite. So it would need to have a covering which can tolerate, which can withstand all those secretions and still help the parasite to live through. Then it has to have modifications for holding to the host tissue. The teeth, the suckers, the adapted mouth parts, whereby it can hold to the host and keep feeding on whatever feed it is adapted for. Then it should be having a reduced kind of digestive system. Reduced in the sense either it is functionally reduced or it is structurally reduced, because inside the body of host what it feeds upon is either living cells or digested food. So it should be having a digestive system which need not participate in digestion, which would better help it in absorbing the food and use it suitably. Then it will have or it generally has a reduced nervous system, almost defunct or relatively reduced. No specific functions it needs to perform there. Then it has to have a capacity to secrete certain antienzymes which would neutralize the enzymes secreted by the host body, or certain chemicals which would stimulate the host to release certain chemicals that would function as antienzymes or which would protect the host and the parasite at the same time. Then it has to have a mode of respiration that would better be an anaerobic type, because inside the host body there is very little possibility of that parasite getting an exposure, getting a facility to take in oxygen that would help it in aerobic respiration. So it better be adapted for an anaerobic mode of respiration. Then reproductive system. See, generally in the endoparasitic mode of living, the parasite needs to have a complex reproductive system, mostly a hermaphroditic one, and then it should have a complex life cycle, generally involving an intermediate host. Obviously, because the parasite, through repeated attack on the host tissues, there is a possibility that the host may become dead. Now, if the host is dead, even the parasite inside the body of host would be dead. So to avoid its own extinction, so to avoid its own death or elimination, it needs to follow a life cycle that will involve an intermediate host where it can continue to survive, through where it can get transmitted to another host and live there. So a complex life cycle involving at least some intermediate host. And the eggs which it lays should be capable of surviving under extreme conditions, extreme dry, extreme wet, high acidic medium, highly alkaline medium, whatever it should be, the eggs should be able to survive through and then lead to the next part of the life cycle. Now these are the adaptations that we can talk about as adaptations for ectoparasitic or endoparasitic mode of living. Next, we actually get to understand a few parasitic life cycles. The first one to start with is Entamoeba histolytica, the one that causes Amoebiasis. The name of this parasite itself gives most of its description. Entamoeba. Ento means Enteron. It stands for Enteron, which means intestine. Amoeba, it stands for the shape which it is made of. So an amoeboid organism surviving inside the intestine. That is what it means. And the species name says histolytica. Histo stands for tissue and lysis stands for destruction or killing or damaging. So an amoeboid parasite living inside the body, inside the host intestine and causing damage to the tissue. That is what it means. So as I said, the name itself gives part of its description. Actually, it stays in the intestine, but when it enters the body, when it enters the body, it is generally in form of a cyst, a highly protective covering that it is provided with, and inside the cyst would be either one or more amoeboid organisms, Entamoeba. Now when it enters the body, it, without being affected anywhere, it enters the body obviously through contaminated food or water or milk. So through that, it enters the alimentary tract, through the mouth, then through pharynx, through esophagus, it goes straight into the intestine. And then the cyst opens up. The amoebae come out. And these amoebae then start attacking the intestinal lining. Now in Entamoeba histolytica, there are two forms. One that is called as a magna form. The other one is called as a minuta form. Out of the two, magna is a harmful one. minuta is a harmless one. This magna form I'm talking about. So when it enters the intestine in the cyst form, that cyst, the covering opens up, the parasites they come out, and these parasites they enter the intestinal cavity. Here they start releasing a secretion called cytolysin. As we have already learned, lysis stands for killing, destruction, damaging, and cyto here stands for cell. So this chemical, this secretion, it starts destroying the intestinal mucosa, innermost covering of intestine. These cells are damaged, their cells are destroyed by the secretion, and the parasite then invades it. Initially, it damages the mucosal lining, then it damages the blood vessel, then it damages the connective tissue, and that is how it leads to these symptoms. Now, what are the symptoms? Primarily, it causes diarrhea. Then, gradually, the diarrhea becomes severe, it leads to bloody diarrhea. Then the parasite which has entered the intestinal lining, it may enter the bloodstream, and through bloodstream it may get carried to different organs. It may get carried to liver, it may get carried to heart, it may get carried even to brain. And wherever it goes, it causes damage to those tissues. So if it goes into liver, it causes damage to liver. If it goes into heart, if it goes into brain. Sometimes it even causes damage to the brain tissue. And neurological symptoms also could be seen. So that is how it enters the host tissues. And there it actually starts multiplying, and majorly the multiplication is by binary fission. It multiplies mostly by binary fission. So repeated cycles of binary fission it goes through. But then, as I already mentioned, a repeated attack on the tissue may cause death of the host. The infected human may die because of the infection. The symptoms, as I said, diarrhea, bloody diarrhea, neurological symptoms, all those occur. Then later on, it may lead to nausea if it enters the liver. It may lead to headache. It may lead to a feverish state. It may lead to dizziness, fatigue, and extreme condition could be, it may even lead to death. So if the host, if the human having this infection is dead, the parasite also is destroyed. So to avoid its own destruction, after repeated cycles of binary fission, it undergoes encystment. This kind of cyst, it develops around itself. Inside the cyst, it undergoes multiple fission. More than 2 Entamoeba are formed inside the cyst, and then the cyst is eliminated through feces. Now that excreted cyst may enter another host through feco-oral route. Now what is that? The cyst which is excreted by one human may be carried into milk or water or other food material through maybe a housefly or maybe some other that kind of a carrier. And if it is carried into food or water, then it enters another host, repeats its cycle. So its transmission, it's basically through contaminated food. That's a vehicle, as we discussed earlier. Now usually the symptoms take relatively a shorter time to show up, and if it is detected, then it can be treated by administering a medicine called Quinidochlor. Quinidochlor is the effective medicine that's available for treating Amoebiasis. That's about Entamoeba histolytica, its life cycle, the mode of transmission, and the treatment. Do keep watching the videos, share them, subscribe to them, and let's help your friends and family members watch them. If you have any suggestions or comments or anything to ask, feel free to post your suggestions.